In the NFL, you can't really tell who will be the next Tom Brady or who will be the next Ryan Leaf. 2010s marked a great time of change for the NFL, but also meant not everyone was able to stay afloat in the league. Here are 5 of the biggest quarterback flops of the decade. Now, to qualify for the list, they must have either run into legal issues, bad performance, bad teammate grades, or all of the above. Hype is also going to be a big factor, especially for some of the offenders on this list who had an immense amount of hype in college and absolutely fizzled out in the NFL. Let's find out. For the record, I will not be including Robert Griffin III, albeit he was extremely underwhelming after his rookie season, but he's still on an active NFL roster as of 2020, so he got lucky in that case. I will also not be reviewing any quarterbacks from the 2019 or 2020 draft classes, as they still have plenty of time to either prove me wrong or prove if they are eligible for this list. So here we go! Let's see who's at the bottom of the barrel. Alright, kicking off this list is 2017 second overall pick Mitch Trubisky. Now, Trubisky was picked second overall by the Bears in the 2017 draft after trading 2 second-round picks and a 4th rounder to the 49ers. So new coach Matt Nagy reportedly passed on perennial Pro Bowlers Deshaun Watson and recent Super Bowl MVP Patrick Mahomes, especially if you take a look at who he was picked in front of. Now, Trubisky isn't on here for necessarily badness, but just rather disappointment. He was picked in front of 2 perennial powerhouses in the forms of Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. I mean, seriously, Mahomes is just 3 times better than Russell Wilson at his own game. And also, at the same time, I don't see exactly what's the problem with Deshaun Watson. He's a perennial Pro Bowler with the Houston Texans, albeit Bill O'Brien doesn't really give him a whole lot to work with. Still, I would have taken him over Trubisky. Anyway, as I said about his rookie season, he threw 7 picks and 7 touchdowns, and for 2,193 yards, it's not terrible, but pretty underwhelming from a second overall pick. The next season, he was pretty much carried by a top 3 defense to his first Pro Bowl appearance and his first playoff appearance against the Eagles, which kind of ended with a double doink. That all came in light of the fact that the Bears just managed to fleece the Raiders and just rebuild a killer defense in the form of gaining Khalil Mack. On top of that, they had a great rushing game with Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery. The Bears' situation really was just a one-year wonder, as Prince Amukamara and Kevin White were both still on the books with multi-million-dollar contracts. And it would only get worse, as Trubisky's contract would have kept him in Chicago for the next 5 years, coughing up at least $25.8 million annually, and robbing them of pursuing anyone else in free agency to upholster that top-tier defense. How do you do something that badly, is my real question. You're chucking this much money at a guy whose contemporaries all run circles around him for miles. I mean, if you look at the comparable people on the stat sheet, worse still is the fact that the McCaskies openly showed signs of regret for that pick. And it's made even worse by the fact if you look at all of Trubisky's contemporaries. For instance, in 2017, Goff threw for the same amount of interceptions, but also threw 21 touchdowns. And he passed for 3,804 yards. Seriously. Made worse by the fact is that the other 3 quarterbacks of the NFC North have all been given so much shit for how little they perform in crucial moments and in key playoff games, yet Trubisky performed significantly worse than them. For example, look at how much people shit on Matt Stafford and Kirk Cousins, yet both of them have more than doubled Trubisky's passing records and his touchdowns. Aaron Rodgers has almost tripled in terms of passing for the past 3 seasons. Fortunately for the Bears, about 3 days ago they actually voided the rest of his 5-year contract and voided the remaining $25.8 million in addition to the fact that they just signed Nick Foles. It's pretty apparent Matt Nagy knows that his experiment has failed. In fact, Foles is going to be on the books for the next 3 years as they picked up the rest of his contract from Jacksonville after only 1 year. It's made all but worse for Trubisky in the sense that they've restructured his contract to pretty much putting him one step above being waived. Now, I don't know a whole lot of teams that are really going to utilize him to that level that Nagy saw in him, or really that they saw in him in the 2018 season, but he's just really not that talented. He's not a very good scrambler, he's not a very good passer, he's not very accurate. Like, for example, Jared Goff has a 63% completion rate. Trubisky is significantly worse. He's at 54. Leave me a comment if you think that there is a team that could probably suit him in some way, as I really don't see much of a future for him. The only thing that could have made the 2017 draft even worse for the Bears is if they'd stuck with Nagy's gut and actually went to draft Deshaun Kaiser. And things get worse looking at hindsight. Remember that Patrick Mahomes guy? He not only got the Super Bowl MVP, but he passed for nearly 1,000 yards more than Trubisky. Threw for 4,031 yards last season. Previous season, he threw for over 1,000 more yards and came 5 touchdowns short of breaking Peyton Manning's single-season touchdown pass record. In a recent interview, Matt Nagy even claimed that he wasn't too all fixed on Mahomes' performance in college and claimed that he wouldn't fit the draft scheme. The worst comment I could find was he claimed that Mahomes didn't look very mobile and didn't look very adaptive. Now, anyone with half a brain cell about football could tell you that. I mean, the man literally has better legs than Lamar Jackson. He can sidearm a football 40 yards. Just hope Trubisky's days are numbered, Bears fans. They might be. Yes, I know this one's a bit of a ways away, but this one was just too big to miss. Now, I don't know if you remember, but Jimmy Clausen had a multitude of awards all the way through his high school and college career. In fact, in 2006, he was named as the highest-rated quarterback in all of high school football in the entire country. Sports Illustrated even called him the kid with the golden arm, and end up as an eternal NFL draft bust. His arrogance also cost him a few minor legal incidents involving altercations. I mean, regardless, multiple analysts compared him to the likes of Joe Montana as the next great Notre Dame quarterback in the NFL, and he did end up like a famous Notre Dame quarterback in the NFL. Rick Meyer! Right off the bat, his rookie season, he passed for 1,558 yards with a terrible 3 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. During his first start against the Bengals in Week 3, he completed 16 of 33 passes and 180 yards with 2 lost fumbles and an interception. It got so bad that game that Steve Smith Sr. was seen throwing things on the sideline and screaming at Jimmy for such a poor performance. And things got even worse. He played so badly against the Saints the following week that he was actually benched after only 13 plays. Unfortunately for Jimmy, that was the final start he'd ever have in a Panthers uniform. They went 2-14 and got the first overall pick, which they used on Cam Newton, who was immediately named the starter. Jimmy wasn't even on the bench for the backup position. He was injured in a 2012 preseason game and was waived by the Panthers. Luckily for him, in 2014, the Bears ended up giving him another shot by making him their starter, and unwisely benched Jay Cutler and went on to get their asses kicked in a 5-11 season in 2014, and then 6-10 the next year. Jimmy was released in November of 2015 and only played for the Bears during one shutout loss to the Seahawks in Week 3 that season. That game ended up being a 26-0 shutout. Went on to the Ravens as Joe Flacco's backup and Matt Schaub's backup, but only ever played one game. Threw 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions that game. Yeah, it doesn't strike me as very much help. His career ended with 7 touchdowns and 14 interceptions, and only 255 completions. It's pretty much safe to say his career is all but ended. He's shown no activity to try and rejoin an NFL roster, and made no effort to contact teams to try and revitalize his career. I mean, goddamn, what a waste. I think of another quarterback whose team went 2-14 with him. In fact, I think I know quite a few. Just you wait. Yeah. Yes, the most recent piece of stinging salt in Sam Bradford for us Rams fans. This one actually has an interesting story. So, initially, Bradford actually got an athletic scholarship to attend Oklahoma, and actually proved himself to be a capable starter for the Sooners. In fact, by his sophomore season, he'd actually already broken Josh Heupel's school passing record. I mean, he was on his way. He actually went on to win the 2008 Heisman by a margin of 34 votes. Meanwhile, his buddy Blake Griffin actually won the Naismith Award, marking the first time Oklahoma actually had a top qualifier in football and a top qualifier in basketball. Common recurring problem for him would be he suffered another injury in his following season. His junior season was cut short when he had to have shoulder surgery, which pretty much just sidelined him. Albeit he was still eligible for the draft and was still pretty highly ranked. He was drafted first overall by the Rams, who had actually ranked up to get the pick by going 1-15 the season prior. Yeah, it didn't sound like a whole lot of promise. This Rams team didn't really do him a whole lot of favors. He was drafted to replace the void left by Mark Volger after he was released in 2010. However, it wasn't actually that bad for him his rookie season. He was off to a hot start, broke Peyton Manning's rookie season passing record, and he won Offensive Rookie of the Year. In fact, he set the NFL record for most consecutive completions without an interception as a rookie. His future looked bright, but the Rams didn't. The next year, they looked to be to another hot start, going 4-0 in the preseason, but the rest of the team, including Bradford, ended up fighting a bunch of nagging injuries. In his case, was a nagging ankle injury, and it forced him to sit out a good chunk of the 2011 season. After a pretty terrible 2-14 season, Steve Spagnuolo was fired and replaced with Jeff Fisher. Kind of has a history for destroying quarterbacks. Just ask Vince Young, Nick Foles, and Case Keenum. 2012 saw him finish with a career-high 3,702 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. Rams went 7-8-1 that season. The next season they went 7-9, and Sam ended up getting hit with even more injuries. In fact, in 2014, he was hit with an ACL injury against the Browns in a preseason game and pretty much sat out the rest of the season. That was the final game he would ever play for the Rams. He was actually traded in a package deal along with 2 other draft picks for Nick Foles from Philadelphia. He went 7-9, passing for 19 touchdowns and 14 interceptions. He found minor success in Philadelphia. In fact, Chip Kelly refused to bench him, even regardless of the injuries. And things would get worse in 2016. Chip Kelly was fired mid-season and replaced with Doug Peterson. By then, the writing was on the wall after they'd picked Carson Wentz second overall in the draft. It got worse for Sam. He would have had a 2-year extension kick-in with the Eagles, but Peterson ended up canceling it in favor of throwing a bigger signing bonus at Carson Wentz. And even more unfortunate, he ended up sitting out the entire season, either sitting with a clipboard or just behind Carson Wentz. In an effort to keep his job, he actually convinced Doug Peterson to let him play in 3 of the preseason games. He actually played rather well, the 63% completion rate. Peterson even agreed to let him restructure his contract for that coming season. So everything seemed like it was finally coming in order for him to actually get back on a starting roster. It seemed Peterson was impressed. He was unsure about his new quarterback and really unsure about any of the backups. He'd even beat Chase Daniel for the starting job. It seemed like he'd actually get a starting day like he'd always wanted. Everything seemed to work out better. It seemed Peterson had canceled the proposed trade for several picks and possibly Bradford to the Broncos in exchange for more draft picks. Problem is, by the time the regular season started to wind around, it seemed like Bradford's preparation was all for naught. Without any information from the coaching staff, Wentz was actually named the starter. Peterson, it seemed, wasn't very interested in keeping Bradford on the roster after all. And after about 3 days of minimal contact between the two of them, it became pretty obvious what Peterson's intentions were. He'd actually signed over Bradford's contract to the Vikings. This actually helped bring his career back to life. That first season in Minnesota, he threw 20 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. He'd even broken Drew Brees' single-season completion record. Problem was, the very next season, injuries came back and ended it right after week 4. In 2018, he left in free agency and signed an overpriced deal with the Cardinals. Yeah. And after 2 ineffective games, he was benched in favor of Josh Rosen. Yes. In the end, he threw for 19,449 passing yards, threw 103 touchdowns and 61 interceptions, which isn't actually that bad now that I look at it. In fact, I feel like his career really could have flourished had he managed to stay healthy. As of November 13th, 2018, he was released by the Cardinals and has shown no signs of return to the league. Which is kind of sad, because he really looked like he had the most promise of anyone on this list. He did better than the next guy. Oh yeah, that's right. The hype for this one was immense. He was a 2-time BCS National Champion, a 2007 Heisman Trophy winner. He was a 2-time SEC Player of the Year, 2nd-team All-American, 2-time Heisman finalist, and the list just goes on and on. When was the last time you saw someone with this much hype going into the NFL draft? Now, to put in perspective, the Broncos were looking to try and rebuild their offense. They'd brought in offensive coordinator from the Patriots, Josh McDaniels, as their new head coach, and they were trying to make their first playoff appearance since 2005. If you know anything about ex-Patriots staff, it's that they have never made a good head coach. The only one who'd actually made a playoff appearance is Bill O'Brien, and he's pretty much managed to destroy his team already this season. Things got worse for McDaniels as he was implicated in the Spygate scandal and he was promptly fired halfway through the 2010 season. Eventually in 2011, John Fox took over, but they still decided to keep several of McDaniels' picks left around. The Broncos' 4-12 record in 2010 let them trade up and pick Tim Tebow 25th overall in the draft that year. Oddly enough, due to a weak AFC West, the Broncos managed to get a wildcard win over the Steelers, only to get absolutely suffocated by the Patriots in the next round, 45-10. Problem was, Tebow couldn't even find a way to prove himself for the starting job, and mostly just sat behind Kyle Orton until he was actually traded mid-season to the Chiefs. After 2 back-to-back comeback victories in that season, he ended up losing 3 in a row, and Elway himself even demanded to bench him. It's not really hard to see why. The previous year, with one of the worst offensive lines in the league, Kyle Orton actually passed for 3,653 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. Tebow, the very next year, passed for only 1,729 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Fortunately, the Broncos managed to limp into the postseason into a wildcard game against the Steelers. Amazingly, Tebow actually outdueled Ben Roethlisberger in the wildcard round, and ended up throwing an 80-yard game-winning touchdown to seal the deal. Problem was, his teammates weren't too pleased afterwards. Tebow had passed for 316 yards by the end of the game, and ended up using this into promoting a prayer sermon, which didn't sit over well with people such as John Elway or Champ Bailey, who were pretty opposed to religion in the locker room. The very next week wasn't so great for them. Tebow completed 9 of 26 passes, and he took 5 sacks from the Patriots in a 45-10 loss. Grumblings of instability with him in the locker room persisted about his frequent evangelistic motives, but most rumors were typically denied. On February 8th, Elway still announced, well, rather reluctantly, that Tebow would still be the starter going into the 2012 season. The problem was there was a lot of fan speculation that Elway had actually intended to trade Tebow at some point in the near future, considering he only had a 50% completion rate, which was one of the lowest in the NFL at the time. Those fan suspicions were later confirmed on March 21st, 2012, when they ended up signing Peyton Manning. Well, you could say goodbye to that job. He was traded for near nothing chump change to the Jets. He was basically traded for a 4th and 6th round pick to the Jets. And from here, things would only get worse for Tebow. He was actually benched in favor of Mark Sanchez. This play just epitomizes how pitiful the Jets were. Anyway, after that, the Jets released him. Then he just spent a season as Brady's backup, doing nothing, sat out a season, and then just signed up as Sam Bradford's backup and then just faded into obscurity. Can't say he was as overhyped as this guy. Oh, come on, you knew this one was coming, right? There is no way I could have left out Johnny Football. He was a 2012 Heisman Trophy winner and a 2013 Heisman Trophy finalist. He was insane at Texas A&M. The hype around him was bigger than anything in the decade. There really is no word to put for how much hype people had behind him in the NFL. The Browns traded up with the Eagles to pick him with the 25th overall pick. Oh look, another 25th overall pick. Yay. Anyway, right off the bat, he went to becoming a truant of the NFL. He was fined $12,000 for flipping off a Redskins player during a preseason game, and he eventually lost his starting job to Brian Hoyer. Things got worse in week 15 when they actually started him against the Bengals. He threw 80 yards and 2 interceptions. Next week, he completed 3 of 8 passes against the Panthers, and then he was ruled out with the hamstring injury for the season. At the end of that season, he completed 18 of 35 passes, 176 yards, and 2 interceptions. Multiple Browns players were pretty infuriated with management of having him as the starter for the next season coming in, and one player even called him a guaranteed joke. Next season, he improved for about a game, and then went right back to being absolutely terrible. In a game against the Rams, he actually completed 4 of 5 passes for 27 yards in a 24-6 loss. His only career win came against the San Francisco 49ers in week 14 of the 2015 season, which snapped a 7-game losing streak by Cleveland. To cap off his career, he passed for 1,675 yards and 7 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. I don't have to go over his legal issues, do I? I do? Oh, don't. Everyone's done it already. Anyway, pretty well documented that he had a multitude of legal problems ranging from drug possession to DUI to domestic assault, skipping team practice, to pretty much staying up late, partying out in Vegas when he skipped team meetings and practices, and concussion protocol. I mean, it's pretty well covered by this point of why he really contributed to his own downfall. And surprise, surprise, on March 11, 2016, the Browns promptly released him. About a week later, they actually signed RG3, I should point out. And it would get worse as his legal troubles only got worse and made national headlines. I just repeated myself. But regardless, you get the point. I mean, he really wasn't able to stay clean or really keep himself out of trouble and just maintain that college attitude. It really affected people like Jimmy Clausen or Lawrence Phillips, and Marinovich, if you want another example. I should also mention that Drew Rosenhaus, famous sports agent, he's represented guys like Chad Ochocinco, Antonio Brown, I'll get to that in a second, Terrell Owens, and Rob Gronkowski, to name a few. Manziel was the first client of his in his 27-year career as a sports agent to get drops. That's an accomplishment. The only other person to get that, like I said, would be Antonio Brown, which happened actually last year. Eventually, one by one, sponsorships and multiple companies sponsoring any of his merchandise just all pulled out. Nike was the last one to go, taking out a good chunk of his income from what I've read. Fortunately for him, I should say, after a rap sheet longer than Wes Scantlin's, he actually got a job in the CFL playing quarterback for the Montreal Alouettes. Yeah, he probably threw 4 interceptions in his first game. I am not making that up. Pretty much by Christmas of 2018, the entire league as a whole just decided he really wasn't worth keeping around and severed all ties from him. He's probably one of the first players I've ever found to get banned by the CFL. And even Kajana Carter managed to have a career in the CFL. So there you have it. Those are 5 of the biggest busts of the recent decade. If you think I missed any, or if you have any suggestions for upcoming vids or any kind of stream, be sure to let me know in the comments. Overall, I feel like I did a fair assessment of all of this. I learned some things that I didn't necessarily expect off the bat from some of these players. In fact, in the case of Sam Bradford, I actually learned he had a rather interesting story. Anyway, thank you for watching.